He shoved her son. In front of everyone. And in that instant, the quiet woman in the cardigan, who had been watching silently from the corner, transformed. She stepped forward, not to fight, but to protect. And within seconds, the arrogant black belt who mocked her lay face down on the mat, stunned, breathless, and utterly humbled. But this story isn't just about martial arts. It's about legacy. About a mother who walked away from fame to raise her child with dignity. And about what happens when the world finally sees the strength it once ignored. If you've ever been underestimated or had to remind someone what quiet power truly looks like, this story is for you. Please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that celebrate honor, justice, and the strength that doesn't fade with age. Don't forget to hit that notification bell. Your story matters too. Danielle Carter stepped quietly into Silver Oak Dojo, the scent of sweat, discipline, and linoleum mats filling the air. At 42, she didn't turn heads. Not that she wanted to. Dressed in a faded cardigan, black slacks, and well-worn sneakers, she looked like any other working mother wrapping up a long Tuesday. But Danielle was more than that. A single mom, a school librarian, and the quiet pillar behind a boy trying to rebuild himself. Her eyes immediately found Jalen, her 15-year-old son, moving stiffly across the mat. He wasn't fast, he wasn't flashy, but he was trying, and that meant everything. He had started martial arts just 3 weeks ago, after a group of older kids cornered him behind the school. The bruises faded. The fear hadn't. Danielle settled onto a bench near the corner, the kind of seat people forget is even occupied. No one in the dojo paid her any mind. She was just the mom with the soft voice, the gentle eyes, the silence. But what they didn't realize was this. The storm was already in the room. And before the day was done, this quiet woman would teach them all what real strength truly looks like. At the center of the dojo stood Sensei Brent Donovan, a man built like a tank and just as subtle. 36 years old, a third-degree black belt, and a former Marine, Brent carried himself like every room belonged to him, and everyone in it owed him respect. But what he commanded wasn't respect. It was fear. His voice cut through the air like a whip. "Pathetic, Mason, keep your guard up or go home." The boy, maybe 16, flinched, his face flushed red as he stumbled through his form. Parents along the wall shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. This was Brent's dojo. You didn't question his tone, you just nodded and hoped he wouldn't turn that fire on your kid next. Danielle watched quietly, her lips pressed into a firm line. Brent's movements were sharp, yes, refined even, but there was something beneath them, something angry. Something careless. Then he glanced her way. Just a flicker, but it lingered a beat too long. A smirk touched his lips. To him, she was a harmless onlooker, a bored mother in sneakers, a woman well past her prime with nothing to offer but silence. Brent didn't realize he had just locked eyes with the last person he should ever underestimate. The class was beginning to wind down. Brent clapped his hands sharply, signaling for the students to line up near the center of the mat. The usual routine, group bow, a few closing remarks, maybe some praise for improvement, though with Brent that was rare. But today he had something different in mind. His voice rang out suddenly, loud enough to jolt a few students upright. "Hey there, ma'am," he called across the mat. Danielle looked up slowly, unsure if he was speaking to her. He was. Brent grinned like a man about to tell a joke only he thought was funny. "You've been watching real close over there. Got me wondering, care to step out here and show us what a strong mom looks like?" A ripple of chuckles moved through the room. A few students nudged each other. Even one or two parents smiled awkwardly, unsure how to react. Danielle remained seated, calm, measured. She shook her head gently and began to rise, quietly gathering her tote bag. But Brent wasn't done. His smile turned sharp. "Hold up, don't go just yet," he said, walking across the mat with theatrical swagger. He gestured toward Jalen, who had just stepped off the floor, towel in hand. "Let's see if courage runs in the family. Come on, Jalen, stand next to your mom. Let's give the class a little inspiration." Jalen froze. Danielle placed a protective hand on his shoulder. The room went still. "Or," Brent added, voice thick with challenge, "maybe both of you just want to walk out now and pretend none of this ever happened." Silence. Even the giggling stopped. Danielle's hand slipped away from her son's shoulder. She straightened slowly, deliberately, as if shedding something invisible. Her eyes, so soft minutes before, had turned unreadable. She stepped forward, not fast but with intent, and faced Brent squarely. Her voice was steady, calm, unshaken. "You want a demonstration?" she said. "Fine." Brent folded his arms. "That's the spirit." Danielle raised her hand slightly, stopping him cold. "But one condition." Brent cocked his head. "Oh, what's that?" She took a step closer, voice lowered but still clear enough for everyone in the room to hear. "If I win, if I take you down right here in front of your students, you owe them something." Brent's smile flickered. "Like what?" Danielle didn't blink. "A real apology. Not just to me, to every student you've belittled, to every kid you've yelled at like they were your enemy. You apologize for how you've treated them, and you show them what accountability looks like." The weight of her words hung in the air. No one laughed now. Jalen looked up at his mother with wide eyes, awe creeping into his expression. The same students who had snickered moments earlier now stood still, some glancing toward Brent with uncertainty. He chuckled, but it didn't carry the same swagger. "All right," he said, louder than necessary. "Let's make it interesting." He turned back toward the class. "You all hear that? This is just for fun, a little friendly match to show why we train seriously." But Danielle didn't smile. She simply took off her cardigan and folded it neatly beside her bag. As she slipped off her shoes, the light caught the defined muscles in her arms, the grace in her movements too natural to be casual. It was then that something began to shift in the room. Not fear, not even excitement. Respect, real respect, was beginning to replace the doubt. They didn't know it yet, but this wasn't going to be a sparring match. It was going to be a reckoning. Brent clapped his hands together with forced enthusiasm, his voice booming across the dojo. "All right, everyone. Before we get started, I thought we'd loosen things up with a little warm-up, something educational and fun." He reached behind the instructor's table and grabbed the remote to the mounted flat screen on the wall. The lights dimmed slightly as he clicked play. At first, no one understood what they were watching. The grainy footage showed a group of elderly women in pink headbands and floral leggings, awkwardly moving through a slow-motion martial arts routine in what looked like a suburban community center. Their kicks were comically low, their balance shaky. One fell over during a spin. Laughter erupted across the room. Some of the teenage boys snorted, others pointed at the screen. Even a few of the parents gave a reluctant chuckle, unsure what was happening but swept up in the moment. Brent grinned wider. "Don't worry," he said, gesturing toward Danielle with mock courtesy. "We'll keep it low impact. Wouldn't want anyone breaking a hip today." Danielle stood still. Jalen's face turned crimson, his fists clenched at his sides. His mother, his anchor, was being mocked before a room full of strangers, and he couldn't do anything about it. He turned toward her, lips trembling, about to beg her to walk away. But Danielle looked over her shoulder at him and smiled. A small smile. Not forced, not shaken. A knowing smile. Then, wordlessly, she unbuttoned her faded gray cardigan, folded it with care, and placed it on the bench beside her tote bag. And that's when the laughter began to quiet. Because beneath the cardigan wasn't the frailty anyone expected. Her blouse revealed shoulders sculpted by time, not by vanity, lean and defined. Her arms moved with an ease and control no weekend fitness class could teach. There was power in the way she folded her sleeves, economy in her movement, precision. Somewhere near the back of the room, a father muttered under his breath, "Wait, she's no beginner." Danielle stepped out of her shoes and padded softly across the mat. She didn't move like someone here to prove a point. She moved like someone who had nothing left to prove. Every step was fluid, balanced, grounded. There was no bravado in her posture, only quiet command. Her eyes didn't search for approval or permission or reaction. They focused only on the moment. Brent watched her approach with what started as amusement, but somewhere in the shadow behind his smirk, a sliver of uncertainty had begun to creep in. He laughed a little too loud. "Let's get this over with, shall we? I've got another class in an hour," he barked, rolling his shoulders with dramatic flair. "Don't worry, I'll take it easy on you." Danielle said nothing. Instead, she stepped to the center of the mat and paused, her eyes calmly scanning the space, not for show, but out of habit. Those who were watching closely might have noticed the shift, the way she lowered her center of gravity, how her breathing deepened, how the weight of her body spread evenly between both feet. She wasn't performing. She was preparing. Even the air felt different now. The students, moments ago cracking jokes, grew unusually quiet. One of the older boys leaned toward a younger classmate and whispered, "She hasn't even moved yet, and I feel nervous." Jalen sat frozen on the bench, his shame replaced by something unfamiliar. Pride. Brent finally stepped onto the mat, still clinging to his confidence like a child clutching a broken toy. He threw a few warm-up punches into the air, quick and loud, stealing glances at his students as if to reassure himself that he was still in control. But deep down, something was unraveling. He could feel it. Danielle hadn't said a single word since walking onto the mat. She didn't need to. Her presence was louder than any insult he had ever hurled. And that video? That cheap attempt to humiliate her? It now looked juvenile, desperate, because nothing about the woman standing in front of them fit the image of someone who needed defending. She didn't look fragile. She didn't look afraid. She looked ready. Brent shook out his arms and forced a grin. "All right, Mrs. Carter, let's dance." But something told him this wasn't going to be a dance. This was going to be a lesson. And he was about to be the student. Brent bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, still trying to play the part. "Ready when you are," he said, forcing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Danielle gave a simple nod. No flashy stance, no raised fists, just presence, rooted and still like a tree that knew how to bend with any storm. For a split second, Brent hesitated. Then he lunged. A sharp jab shot forward, aimed straight for Danielle's shoulder. But before it reached her, she wasn't there anymore. No loud grunt, no dramatic movement. Just a gentle sway of her body, enough to let the strike pass harmlessly by. Brent's eyes narrowed. He reset. He threw a second punch, then a third, faster, stronger. Still nothing landed. Danielle slipped past them like smoke through fingers. Her feet barely seemed to touch the mat, yet her positioning was always perfect. Her head tilted by just an inch here, her shoulder rotated just enough there. She wasn't dodging wildly, she was redirecting reality. The dojo, which moments ago had been filled with chuckles and casual murmurs, was now so quiet you could hear the soft pat of Brent's bare feet on the floor. Whispers began. Did she just not move? How did he miss again? She's not even sweating. Brent grunted and launched a low kick toward her thigh. Again? Nothing. Danielle lifted her foot with the timing of a pendulum, smooth, unhurried, like she'd read the move before he made it. He stepped back, chest heaving, confusion rising behind his eyes. Danielle. She hadn't taken a single step forward. She was still standing exactly where she started. And yet she had made the mat hers. Brent's breathing grew heavier, not from exertion, at least not yet, but from the mounting realization that he was no longer in control. He tried again, this time with a flurry, a jab, cross, hook combination, followed by a spinning back fist he liked to use during sparring exhibitions. Danielle rotated her body a half-inch, dipped under the final strike, and simply pivoted to face him again. No retaliation. No effort. No sound, except the quiet gasp of a teenage girl in the front row who whispered, "She's not even trying." Brent stumbled slightly as his own momentum carried him too far forward. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead. Danielle's face remained calm, her eyes clear, her breathing slow and controlled. He shook his head and growled, more to himself than to her. Then he threw a wild punch, sloppy out of frustration. Danielle's body moved, not fast but efficiently, angling just enough to make his fist swing through empty air. As his torso rotated, off balance, she lifted a hand and tapped him lightly on the back of his elbow. Just a tap. But to the trained eye, it was a warning. I could have broken your arm. Brent spun around, off-kilter, and planted his feet awkwardly to stay upright. The whispers grew louder. A mother leaned forward, her hand over her mouth. A father shook his head slowly in disbelief. Even the kids, the ones who once cheered Brent's bravado, now stared wide-eyed at the woman who had just dismantled every strike without landing a single blow. She wasn't flashy. She was clinical. She wasn't fast. She was flawless. Brent began to circle, his confidence visibly unraveling, his arms lowered, his guard slipped. He was sweating, profusely now, and she still hadn't broken a sweat. He muttered under his breath, "What is this?" Danielle tilted her head slightly, almost sympathetically, her voice quiet but firm carried across the mat. "This isn't fighting, Brent. This is knowing when not to." He flinched, whether from her words or his own mounting frustration, no one could tell. Jalen sat frozen on the bench, watching in stunned silence. His mother, his quiet, book-loving, cardigan-wearing mother, was standing in front of an entire class of students and taking apart a trained black belt with nothing but grace and breath control. And she hadn't touched him once. The room had shifted entirely. This was no longer a sparring match. It was a lesson in humility, and everyone was learning. Even Brent, though he didn't want to admit it yet. He tried one more time. He let out a guttural yell and lunged forward with a strong forward-stepping cross, putting all his frustration and mass behind it. Danielle pivoted around his shoulder, placed her hand on his back mid-motion, and simply guided him past her like a child throwing a tantrum. He nearly tripped. The room erupted, not in laughter, but in a stunned, reverent silence. Danielle stepped back into her original stance, hands lowered, eyes steady, posture untouched. It was becoming clear to everyone, even to Brent himself. He wasn't in control anymore. She was. And whatever this was, it wasn't even close to being her full strength. The dojo was frozen. Brent Donovan stood in the center of the mat, red-faced and gasping, while Danielle Carter, still poised, still calm, watched him with the expression of someone who had no interest in proving a point. She had already proven everything, except one thing. No one knew who she was. Not yet. Near the back row, a woman named Linda Marshall, mother of a green belt named Elijah, had been quietly recording the exchange on her phone. At first, it was out of curiosity, but now her hands trembled slightly as she zoomed in, catching the way Danielle moved, not with brute force, but with something deeper. Muscle memory, precision, mastery. Linda didn't know martial arts well, but she knew elegance when she saw it. And there was something about the way this woman breathed. With a mixture of instinct and curiosity, she uploaded the 23-second clip to the Silver Oak Dojo parents group chat with the caption, "Anyone know this woman? Danielle Carter, Jalen's mom. She's not normal. She moves like a pro." At first, there were just a few read receipts. Then a typing bubble. Then a message. From one of the older dads, Mr. Pendleton, who rarely posted anything. "That's not Danielle Carter, that's Danielle Blake." Pause. More typing. "She used to go by that name. Look it up." 2 parents opened Google, then 4 more. Within 30 seconds, at least a dozen phones were pointed down in laps, screens glowing as people furiously searched the same thing. Danielle Blake plus Jiu-Jitsu plus Black Orchid. The first link that came up was a 1999 feature from Black Belt magazine titled "The Silent Storm, How Danielle Black Orchid Blake Dominated 3 World Championships." Beneath it, a picture of a young woman, muscular, poised, braided hair, and a stare so focused it seemed to cut through the page. It was her. Same face. Same eyes. Only younger. More images followed. Gold medals. Podium shots. A viral video clip of a takedown in Rio that had once racked up millions of views. And then the stories about how she'd vanished after her 3rd title. No press tour, no retirement speech. Just gone. Back on the mat, Brent was circling again, more hesitantly now. But he didn't know. Not yet. The crowd did. The murmur started softly. A whisper here, a gasp there. "Oh my God, it's her!" "Black Orchid, are you serious? She was undefeated for like 6 years. I watched her videos in college. What's she doing here?" Brent threw another lazy jab. Danielle sidestepped it effortlessly, her body floating just outside his reach. She didn't respond to the whispers. She never looked toward the crowd. She didn't have to. She had known this moment would come, not when people cheered, but when they understood. That this wasn't about putting on a show. It was about making someone remember what respect looked like. At the edge of the mat, Jalen stared at the video now playing on his friend's phone. It was his mother, younger and fierce, submitting an opponent with a technique so fast it looked like it had been edited. The crowd in the video roared. Danielle simply stood and bowed. He looked up at her now. Same control, same dignity. The room around him wasn't laughing anymore. They were watching something sacred. And Brent, well, Brent was finally starting to sense the truth. He stepped back, sweat running down his temples, the bravado draining from his shoulders. "Who are you?" he asked, voice hoarse. Danielle didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath and replied, not loud, not boastful, just enough to be heard. "I used to be Danielle Blake." Brent blinked, his face twisted with disbelief. Danielle added with calm finality, "They called me Black Orchid." The room exhaled, a collective stunned release of breath. It was as if someone had dropped a stone into a still lake and sent a ripple through every soul watching. Even Brent's mouth fell open. He had heard of Black Orchid. Everyone in serious martial arts had. The undefeated champion, the quiet technician, the woman who walked away at the height of her glory after her brother, her training partner, died in a car accident on his way to one of her matches. She had disappeared. Until now. Danielle saw the realization hit him. It wasn't the fame that humbled him. It was the understanding that for the last 10 minutes he'd been trying to bully a woman who once taught Olympic hopefuls how to fall. And she hadn't even hit him once. Just then, one of the students whispered to another, "We've been learning from the wrong person." The whispers hadn't stopped. Even as Danielle revealed who she was, Black Orchid, the legendary fighter who had vanished from the spotlight years ago, the dojo remained a pressure cooker of disbelief and rising tension. Students gawked at their phones, parents whispered in awe, and Brent Donovan stood in the center of the mat, his sweat-soaked GI clinging to him like a second skin. He had just learned the truth, and he didn't know what to do with it. His fists lowered, his shoulders sagged, but his pride, wounded and flailing, still clawed for something to cling to, something to hit, something to deny what every eye in the room had just witnessed. Brent wasn't used to losing, and he sure as hell wasn't used to being forgotten. That's when he made the mistake. A big one. As Danielle calmly stepped back to her position, Brent's eyes flicked toward Jalen, who had risen from the bench to get a better view. And without warning, without thought, Brent lunged and shoved the boy aside. It wasn't violent, but it wasn't gentle either. It was the kind of push you give when your ego is too bruised to care who gets in your way. Jalen stumbled back, caught off guard. He didn't fall, but he staggered, wide-eyed, stunned. The crowd gasped. The room froze. And Danielle changed. It was subtle, but undeniable. Her eyes, once calm and centered, turned to steel. Her entire body shifted from grace to stillness. Not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of precision. She stepped forward, not to retaliate, but to protect. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She simply looked Brent in the eye and said with a low, even tone that sent a chill through the room, "You just crossed the one line I swore I'd never let anyone cross again." The mat beneath her seemed to exhale, like the air itself recognized what was coming. Her hands relaxed at her sides, her knees bent slightly, her shoulders lowered. Not the stance of someone bracing for impact, but of someone ready to end it. Brent hesitated. For a fraction of a second, something deep inside him, some old buried instinct, told him to stop. But his anger was louder than his wisdom. He roared and charged, this time without strategy or discipline, just brute force, arms wide, body weight forward, fists clenched tight. It happened in less than a heartbeat. Danielle didn't brace, she didn't backpedal, she didn't posture. She stepped into his attack, not away from it. Her right hand snapped to the back of his neck while her left redirected his elbow. Her hips rotated, her feet pivoted. And then, with a movement so fluid and fast, it looked like a gust of wind had pulled him down. Brent Donovan hit the mat face first with a sound that silenced the soul. Thud. No one moved. Brent lay motionless, stunned, not unconscious but disoriented, his pride and body equally flattened. Danielle stood above him. Not smug, not proud, just still. She didn't gloat, she didn't taunt. She simply looked down at the man who had tried to dominate a dojo with volume and fear, and showed him the cost of disrespect. A beat passed. Then another. Finally, Brent pushed himself to his knees, wincing as he rolled onto one side, trying to regain his breath and his dignity. His face was red, his lip was bleeding slightly, but it was the look in his eyes that told the story. Not pain. Not even embarrassment. Reckoning. He had just faced someone who chose restraint again and again until he forced her hand. Danielle turned, walked calmly over to Jalen, and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Her eyes softened again, and her voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear. "Are you okay?" Jalen nodded slowly. He wasn't sure what he felt. Shock, awe, relief. But one thing was certain. He would never look at his mother the same way again. Behind them, the dojo was still frozen. Students, once loyal to Brent, now stared in reverent silence. Parents, who had long accepted harsh instruction as a necessary evil, now questioned everything. Danielle didn't stay in the center of the mat. She didn't need to. Her lesson had been delivered, not through anger, not through words, but through an act of calculated mercy. Brent had come for dominance. She responded with a boundary and a warning. And when he crossed it, she reminded everyone in that room that power doesn't roar. It moves quietly until it doesn't. Brent didn't move at first. He stayed where he had fallen, his body sprawled awkwardly on the mat, one hand clutching his ribs, the other pushing gently against the floor, like he wasn't sure it was stable beneath him anymore. The crowd remained silent, breath held. Danielle hadn't moved since the throw. She stood calmly at the edge of the mat, eyes soft again, her hand still resting gently on Jalen's shoulder. Brent slowly lifted his head. His eyes, glassy with confusion, locked on hers, not with rage anymore, but something else. Humbled, unmoored, small. And then, in a voice hoarse and barely audible, he muttered, "Who are you?" The words hung there. Not as a challenge this time, but as a man, broken wide open, asking a question he wasn't sure he wanted the full answer to. Danielle didn't speak. But she didn't need to, because it was Jalen who stepped forward. His voice was quiet but clear, and it carried. "She's the most incredible person I've ever known." Brent blinked, slowly turning his head. "She gave up everything," Jalen continued, "so I could have a life, so I could grow up safe. She walked away from being the best in the world just to be my mom." A hush fell across the dojo. Even the buzzing phones had stopped, the Googling, the gas. It all quieted beneath the sound of a boy realizing, truly realizing, what kind of strength had been raising him all these years. Somewhere near the wall, one of the teenage students lowered their head. Another simply whispered, "Wow." Brent, still kneeling, looked up at Danielle with something almost like recognition, as if he was seeing her for the very first time, not as a challenger, not as a threat, but as a force of grace he couldn't fathom. Danielle took a step forward and extended a hand. No mockery, no condescension, just an open palm. After a pause, Brent took it. She helped him to his feet, effortlessly, without strain. And when he finally stood before her, Danielle looked him in the eye and said softly, "Power isn't how hard you hit, Brent." She let the silence stretch for just a second, letting it settle into him. Then added, "Real power is knowing you could destroy someone and choosing not to." Brent's throat bobbed, his lips parted, but no words came, because there was nothing to say. What Danielle had just taught him, taught all of them, wasn't in the form of a technique or a submission hold. It was in restraint, in control, in the quiet strength of someone who could have crushed his pride and instead gave him a chance to rebuild it. Danielle turned back to Jalen and pulled him gently into her side. He leaned into her, wide-eyed and overwhelmed. And around them, the dojo stood still. Respect had finally arrived. Not because Danielle demanded it, but because she had shown what it looked like, not in combat but in mercy. And that was a lesson no one in the room would ever forget. Brent stood in the center of the mat, shoulders squared, but not with pride this time, with humility. He looked around the room slowly. His students, once intimidated by his volume, now waited, not for instructions, but for something far more important. Brent took a breath. "I've spent years teaching you all about strength," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "How to strike, how to dominate, how to win." He glanced toward Danielle, who stood silently by her son, her arms gently wrapped around Jalen's shoulders. "But today," he continued, eyes sweeping across the group, "I saw something I never taught, something I didn't understand until now." He swallowed hard. "I saw what wisdom looks like, what real discipline means. And I saw what happens when someone stronger than you chooses not to use that strength to hurt, but to teach." The room was completely still. Brent let the silence hang for a moment, then bowed his head. "I'm sorry to all of you." He looked each student in the eye. "For the fear, for the pressure, for forgetting that martial arts isn't about control over others. It's about control over yourself." Danielle finally spoke, her voice calm, unwavering. "Respect isn't earned through fear, Brent." She held his gaze. "It's earned through honor." And with that, the lesson ended, not in bruises, but in truths. As the room slowly exhaled, as if coming out of a long-held breath, Jalen stepped forward. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked up at his mother with wide, glistening eyes. Then, without a word, he wrapped his arms around her waist and buried his face into her shoulder. She held him close. In the middle of the mat, surrounded by students, parents, and a humbled instructor, it was just the two of them, mother and son, standing still in a moment that would echo far beyond the walls of that dojo. Through tears, Jalen whispered just loud enough for her to hear, "I've never been prouder of anyone in my life." Danielle pulled back slightly, brushing his curls from his forehead. Her smile was soft but strong, the kind that holds 1,000 memories and sacrifices behind it. "You don't need to be proud of who I used to be," she said gently. "Just remember who I'll always be. I'll stand by you no matter who stands against us." The words didn't need fanfare. They landed in his heart like a promise etched in stone. And in that moment, more powerful than any trophy or title, Danielle Blake didn't just reclaim her past. She passed her strength forward. Not with a punch, but with love, with legacy, and with the quiet power that only a mother can carry. Some stories end with applause, others with silence. But the ones we remember most, the ones that truly stay with us, are the stories that leave us changed. Danielle's story is one of those. She didn't step into that dojo to prove anything. She didn't walk in looking for a fight or seeking attention. She was just a mother, a woman who had quietly given up a life of glory to raise a child with love and intention. But when the moment came, when injustice touched what mattered most, she didn't need noise or fury to respond. She met arrogance with grace. She answered aggression with restraint. And in doing so, she reminded everyone that true strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sits quietly in the corner. Sometimes it wears a cardigan. Sometimes it's a mother who used to be a champion and never stopped being one in spirit. For those of us in the later chapters of life, Danielle's story carries something deeper. It reminds us that the world may overlook us, but our strength is never gone. It lives in our wisdom, in our patience, and in the quiet power of choosing when to stand tall. And if you've ever felt unseen or underestimated, know this: you are not alone, and your story isn't over. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your reflections, or even your own stories of quiet strength. And if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you won't miss the next powerful journey we share. Here on this channel, we celebrate dignity, justice, and the strength that never fades with age. We're just getting started.